Books are amazing things. They can transport us through time and space. They let our imaginations run wild. A book can be like an old friend that you read from time to time just because you like it that much. Well, today on Blue Sky, we celebrate books and the written word. We'll hear about why summer reading is a special thing and why beach reads sometimes get a bad rap. And of course, we'll get some recommendations. We want to hear from you too. What are you enjoying lately? Do you have a go-to summer book or a reread or something you've just discovered for the first time? Give us a call, 1-800-716-2221, or email bluesky@cbc.ca. And I'm Adam Hunter, hosting today for Alicia Gerbinski. So happy to be with you. Libraries and bookstores have tables and shelves filled to the brim with summer picks. Today, we're joined by two book lovers. Annabelle Townsend is a writer and runs Penny University Bookstore in Regina. Hi, Annabelle.
Hello.
And Miranda Marion works at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. Hi, Miranda.
Hi.
So let's start with you, Annabelle. Every season is good for reading in its own way, but summer seems to be the peak time for reading.
It does.
Why do you think summer is so conducive to reading?
Well, because everyone needs a break. And I think if you're heading out to the lake or something like that, it's good to grab something to read and get away from office screens for a bit. And reading is a great form of escapism if you can't afford the exotic holiday sometimes.
And what kinds of books are you reading this summer?
I read some strange things, but I've got into a whole trope of Japanese books in translation. I don't mean manga. I mean cozy sort of mysteries and things like that. But I've recently been reading Days at the Murasaki Bookshop, and there's now a sequel out called More Days at the Murasaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. I know I'm going to butcher these names. I apologise.
You're doing great.
But they're really short books, and I think that comes from the translation. And it's very simple language, but it's really sort of wholesome and all-enveloping story. You can lose yourself in it. And the first one is just about a woman who sort of has a bad breakup and then ends up living above her uncle's very strange bookshop and falls in love with reading again and sort of sorts her life out and stuff. And it's very feel-good. It's a very non-taxing book to get into, and it's just lovely.
And Miranda, how about you? What are you reading this summer?
I actually just finished a couple of sci-fi and fantasy books, and honestly, summer is just the perfect time to read whatever you want, whatever you've been looking forward to. It's a time to have fun and enjoy what you're reading. So I just finished Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and it was so much better even after talking to coworkers after they finished it. It follows this butler robot after he accidentally kills his owner as he tries to figure out what he's supposed to do next. And there's a lot of philosophical parts to it, but it's also a really easy read. And it was just overall super fun and fascinating. The second one was called Five Broken Blades by May Corland. And it's a fantastical heist novel. So it follows a bunch of characters who are all just huge liars and thieves as they try to steal a king's crown to keep him from being immortal. And it just follows them as they get into all sorts of trouble. And it was just a super fun read.
Yeah, I think that seems to be a theme, right? You have the fun read, the light read, something that's escapism. Miranda, tell us about a couple of books or maybe some authors that are very popular right now with customers.
Yes. So there's actually a local author, Joanne Jackson. She wrote Sunset Lake Resort, which is honestly just the perfect summer read if you're looking for something kind of beachy. It's a cozy, ghostly mystery about a dilapidated beach resort in a remote location. It's seemingly untouched since its former owner died under mysterious circumstances. And so, that one just sounds super exciting, and I think it would be a great summer read.
Annabelle, how about you? What are some of the titles that people are asking for and things that you're having to order in?
There are the classic sort of romance summer reads as well. And we've done a lot of Emily Henry recently. Obviously, my favourites are Beach Reads. She actually has one called Beach Reads and Book Lovers because there's a book connection. But she's done I was going to say funny people. I think it's Funny Story.
Yes.
But those have been hugely popular in the shop as well, just because they're, again, easy reads, a bit of feel-good escapism as well.
And do you find that in the summertime people are gravitating towards those type of titles, the romance, or is it just kind of all over the map?
A few years, yes. This summer, everybody seems to be obsessed with romantasy, which is, again, it's a lot of fun most of the time, but it's romance with monsters. And I've gone across some very, very strange titles in those, particularly independently published ones. And if you go on Book Talk, there's a whole stream of people writing some very, very strange romance smuts, depending on what you're into.
It seems, Miranda, like the Harry Potter generation of people who came up with that are now aging into
yes,
that.
Very much
and there's
so,
a big sort of crossover. I see a lot of head nodding around me right
exactly.
now. What do you think that's the case, that there's sort of, and I'll even throw Star Wars into that, where I grew up with that, and there's kind of that it's almost like a second life for some of these stories, told through a different lens, let's say. Branda, what are your observations about that?
Definitely. I do. Honestly, there's romantasy and philosophy. Mm-hmm. For some reason, philosophy is blowing up, which is super cool. Love that. But yeah, romantasy for sure. Our romance section is actually packed to the max right now. And even the erotica section has blown up. I'm totally blanking on the titles, but something about frozen barbarians. And I'm just so happy that people are having fun with what they're reading.
Very much so.
I was just before we started, Annabelle and I were talking here in studio about audiobooks, and there is this big debate about does your audiobook count towards reading? And there's sort of a traditional thing.
Absolutely.
And I agree. I think that. And I'm someone who's gone back and forth between I'll read a book and then I'll go to an audiobook, or maybe I'll get a streak of audiobooks and then go to a streak of books. What do you make of it almost seems like audiobooks are having a bit of a moment right now?
It was fascinating, actually. They did a few studies of sales numbers and stuff during the pandemic. And one of the things which would never have occurred to me until I read that study was there was a real drop in the sales of audiobooks or downloads because no one was commuting to work. And it's quite common, particularly in Europe, if you're commuting on a train or something, stick your headphones in and listen to a book on the drive or on the commute. And when everyone was working from home, no one listened to audiobooks for a long time. So I thought that was fascinating. But there's also a lot to say that actually listening to someone read you an audiobook, it stimulates the same part of your brain as reading does. So I don't see any difference between that at all.
And Miranda, what do you make of audiobooks? Do you have? Are you an audiobook listener?
Oh, definitely. I don't read much fiction through audio, but I listen to a lot of nonfiction, biographies. I just feel like any way that you're consuming a book, that's great. Like graphic novels, heck yeah. And
Annabelle, when it comes to an audiobook, do you have to pick something? We're talking about summer beach read or something that's for the summertime audiobook. Do you find that that translates the same way with let's say the same kind of genre you're listening to, or you want to read in the
I
summertime?
think I'm with Miranda on that one, in that if I have audiobooks on, personally, I would pick kind of non-fiction ones because it feels like harder work to sit down and read it, whereas if it's in my head while I'm doing something else, I'm more likely to get through it quicker. I did listen to Thomas King's Indians on Vacation on audiobook, and it's long, and there's a lot of dates and places and sort of solid facts in it, which I probably would have skim read if I wasn't listening to it, so it helps in that sense. But some of the books, in terms of fantasy and beach reads and that kind of thing, it does help having someone read it out loud if it's very character driven. We read Counterfeit by Kristin Chen with my book group recently, and the whole book is one character talking to a detective and trying to sort of cover up her misdemeanors. And one of our book members listened to it on audiobook instead of reading it, and she said she got a lot more out of it because it sounded much more convincing when you had someone actually speaking
Acting
and reading these lies that she was trying to get out of trouble with.
Yeah, I find with myself, sometimes the author reading the book can be a different vibe. You get a different thing out of it, or if it's a biography, autobiography, or even if there's multiple characters, sometimes you can get more out of the audiobook. We want to invite our listeners into the conversation as well. Give us a call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. We're talking books. We're talking summer reads. What are your go-tos? What are you reading right now? Do you have some recommendations? Let's get into YA or young adults. And I think we touched on a little bit when we were talking about the romantasy, and that seems to be sort of a popular genre with young adults. Miranda, what makes YA so appealing right now?
Well, I think it's not necessarily like easier reads, but they're definitely appealing to like anywhere from ages like 16 to 30 and above. They're just more accessible, I find. And just within the past few years, they've just really blown up. The cover designers are doing incredible work with just making like eye-catching designs. And Sarah J. Maas in particular, I'm sure, Annabelle, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She started out in the kind of like teen section, but things started to get a little steamier and stuff.
I was going to say,
now,
but not all of those are appropriate for teens
exactly.
anymore.
So we actually had to move them down into the adult section. And I like to say they're accessible. They're easier to read than some like deep literature and some nonfiction and stuff like that. And it's really renewed a lot of young adults' love for reading since high school. Because some people are like, oh yeah, I'm 28 and I haven't read since high school, but I started reading Sarah J. Maas and now I'm on to her second series and that kind of thing.
And then you're caught because you're reading, 1,000-page.
That's it. It's very easy to get sucked in with those. And there's, the series is very, very long.
Let's talk about some suggestions maybe. Do you have any YA suggestions or things that people are picking up at your store?
I go on what my teenager reads. He's 14, and I'm very pleased that I have a 14-year-old boy who does read, but not into Sarah J. Maas. He's actually reading The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern at the moment, and apparently I have to mention this, but not YA as such.
Okay.
He was very into the Heartstopper series, which is Alice Oseman, and that got made into a Netflix show as well. It's very cute. That's one thing that has been quite apparent recently is there is a huge number of much more diverse YA titles, and they cover a lot of sort of contemporary topics, which I think is great for sort of getting teens engaged in reading a bit more. And Alice Oseman is a British writer, but all her books are kind of effortlessly diverse. There's a lot of queer characters and it's just there. It's not made the central point of the story. And I think that's really refreshing sometimes as well. So of hers, I would recommend Radio Silence rather than the Heartstopper series. It's a little bit more grown up, and I hadn't read any YA for a long time, and my son was like, read this, and I really, really enjoyed it. So,
very cool when you can share that with your child.
Definitely.
I know with my parents, they're always recommending books or sometimes trading books, so that's something that's so cool. Miranda, you're in a bookstore a lot of time. What's your favorite section to walk through and browse when you're in a bookstore or library?
Oh my goodness. Okay, but the problem is I can't spend all my money.
That's why I threw library in. Libraries are free.
Exactly. So I kind of find myself going more to sci-fi and fantasy. I used to actually run that section in the store, but I recently gave it up to one of my coworkers, and she's doing a great job running it. But literature, there's like so many different things that you can find in the literature section. Poetry is a big one too, and that's actually another section in our store that's grown quite a lot, especially with like Rupi Kaur, R.H. Sin, some like quote unquote like Instagram poets that are really bringing poetry into like everyday life, and they're talking about very important topics and heartbreak and various things like that. So I love going to the poetry sections and seeing what kind of selection they have. Do they have Canadian poets, Indigenous poets? Those are kind of the ones that I usually gravitate towards. And graphic novels. I'm a huge graphic novel fan too.
And Miranda, do you have any you're on your TBR list for this summer, hoping to get checked off? What books do you have on that list?
Oh my gosh, I literally can't even list all of them. One of my coworkers just lent me the Raw Shark texts, which is we'll just say, very strange novel. And it's so interesting to just step out of my comfort zone, and I have some extra time, and I'll spend some time reading this weird stuff that I never would have picked up.
Yeah, recommendations are always so welcome. That's why we're asking for your recommendations. We have an email here from Keith I want to read. Keith says, reading is crucial for a healthy society. Fiction is a great escape, but I wish more people, included elected officials, read some nonfiction, science, instead of online opinionated garbage. So that's Keith to the point there in an email. So thank you, Keith, for that email. If you want to email us, bluesky@cbdc.ca, or you can call in 1-800-716-2221. Annabelle, I'm guilty of this, is going into a bookstore like yours and looking at a cover and being like, oh, never judge a book by its cover. But is there a time
Absolutely judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you ever walk into or see in your store, or you're maybe in a library and you see a cover and you've picked something up and you've said, this lived up to the cover?
Yeah, and there's some really beautiful covers out there. Miranda mentioned some poetry, and we actually have a local author, Courtney Bates Hardy, and she's come out with Anatomical Venus as her poetry book. Yes. And the cover on it is absolutely amazing, and the poetry is as well. But it's a local publisher, Radiant Press, and they did an exceptional job with that book. It was really, really pretty.
And Annabelle, before we go, I want to ask you, you have some news to share with us about your store. What can you tell us?
What can I tell you? I was trying to put off telling as many people as I could for as long as I could. But,
so now we have live on the radio.
Yeah, you got me. We're having to close down the Penny University bookstore. It's been an amazing 4-year ride, but it has been exceptionally difficult this year with just everything, really, and we've kind of reached the end. It's not in a sustainable place anymore, and I kind of can't afford to keep it going, unfortunately. So I've been frantically contacting all our consignment authors, the people who leave their books on us to sell, and we're trying to clear it up. So we have a massive sale on right now as well, so come down and grab some bargains while you can. And I've got a plan for sort of trying to carry on a smaller scale, probably in the fall. Okay. So watch this space.
Yeah, do definitely share that with us, and we'll share with our listeners. Independent bookstores are so crucial, and bookstores in general. You know, we want people, as we say, reading and buying books. And we
do, and that was always my mission. Unfortunately, books are a luxury, and when everybody else is struggling with the cost of gas and groceries, books tend to fall off the list of priorities, unfortunately. So yeah,
excited to hear that there's still a plan to keep something going in the fall.
And at this rate, my entire basement is going to be full of stuff that I can't sell in the next few weeks. So I will keep up our website, and I'll be selling online for a bit as well.
Okay. And so how long is the sale on for at the store?
Until the end of the month.
Okay. Yeah. So get down to Penny University.
Please do.
And get your sale items, and a lot of the books I'm sure we've mentioned are going to be on that list.
If there's any left, yes.
If there's any left. Before we leave you, Miranda, do you have recommendations or things you want to let our listeners know about reading this summer? Maybe something to get into, try a new genre. Any words of advice?
Well, I love that one of the listeners mentioned science, because I actually have a bunch of nature recommendations, including some stuff for kids too. So one, for example, is called Dispersals by Jessica J. Lee. It's a collection of essays about the lives of plants, and the cover itself is gorgeous. It's got a black background. There's a bunch of flowers and plants on the front. The little blurb that I have saved here is, a seed slips beyond a garden wall. A tree is planted on a precarious border. A shrub is stolen from its culture and its land. What happens when these plants leave their original homes and put down roots elsewhere? So that one I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I own it, and that's probably the next one that I'm going to read this summer. One I wanted to mention for kids, and it's technically for family. It's called The Down and Dirty Guide to Camping with Kids. There's still lots of time to have fun outside and go camping. And this book helps with like family adventures and connects kids to nature. It's by Helen Olson, and it covers choosing a destination for camping, packing, setting up the campsite, planning menus, staying safe, and it's got a bunch of checklists and amazing diagrams on like how to set up a tent and tie knots. Sorry,
Go ahead.
And then there's actually another one that's kind of nature, kind of like modern technology and that kind of thing. It's a graphic novel that I actually gave to my cousin when we went on a vacation a couple weeks ago. It's called Gamerville by Johnny Christmas. A video gamer's championship aspirations are dashed when his parents send him to Camp Reset, where electronics are forbidden and you're forced to socialize, eat healthy, and spend time outside. So the author is Canadian. He lives in Vancouver. It's a great book for ages 8 to 12, and my cousin had a hard time putting it down. So I feel like that says a lot.
Miranda, love those recommendations. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
That was Miranda Marion, who works for McNally Robinson Bookstore in Saskatoon. And Annabelle Townsend, thanks so much for your time today and joining us in studio.
Thank you very much.
Annabelle Townsend is from Penny University Bookstore in Regina. She mentioned the bookstore will be closing. There's a sale there for the rest of the month, and she'll be selling the remainder of the books online and hoping to have something to announce later in the fall. And we wish her all the best. Thanks, Annabelle. As you heard, we have a few weeks to go to buy books at the bookstore there. So our thanks to both of our guests. We have more guests coming up here on Blue Sky. And joining me now in studio will be a familiar voice and face to CBC fans and listeners here in Saskatchewan. CBC Sam McKeag is a resident bookworm around here. In fact, she won't shut up about it. No, I'm kidding.
That's true. You're not wrong.
No, she hosts the Novel Ideas Society Book Club, which is a partnership between the Regina Public Library and CBC Saskatchewan. They host monthly events to explore some interesting books with the authors as well as some special guests. As I mentioned, Sam is in the studio to share some of her favorite summer reads with us. Hi there, Sam.
Hello.
So, Sam, here's the tough question. What is the best book you've read this summer?
This is unfair. Like, absolutely unfair. Have you answered this question?
I can, if you want me to.
Okay, what was the best book you've read this summer?
So I read a book called Shadow Divers by Robert Kurson. It's a true story. It's nonfiction about two divers, essentially, who tried to find a sunken German sub off the coast of New York in the Atlantic Ocean. And it's a years-long, death-defying trip in trials and tribulations, and I listened to it on audiobook actually, and it was by the author, and it was incredible, and I highly recommend it to everyone out there. It's an older book, but it's within the last, I'd say 20 years it was published.
So full disclaimer, Adam and I have had conversations about books
Before.
many times.
Yes.
So it's a toss-up for me. Caitlin did give me the questions in advance because I knew if you put me on the spot, there was no way I was going to be able.
We don't do that at CBC. You're not supposed to give the questions.
But you know
in
what? I'm
advance.
a host. I'm not an interviewee. It's a toss-up for me. And I heard you guys talking about beautiful covers. And I didn't read this one forever because I didn't like the cover. But it's called Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I listened to it on audiobook. And the chokehold this book had on me, because I only listen to audiobooks in the car. That's the only place I listen to them to and from. I live in the North End. It's a bit of a drive.
Yeah, it's such a long commute.
And I was listening to this on the weekend. I was listening to it when I was cleaning. It is about a tennis star who has a record, and this younger tennis star comes up and is about to break her record. And she comes out of retirement to try to defend her record. I know nothing about tennis, but by the end of this,
You're an expert.
Wimbledon was on. And I was like, Wimbledon is on?
Yes.
Like, it was, I don't know what Taylor Jenkins Reid has for a background in tennis, but she has me convinced.
Yeah.
She's the one that wrote Daisy Jones and the Six.
Great book.
The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. She's very well known. And
Prolific.
so I have dove into her books, but I love that one. The other ones, It's called Divine Rivals, and I'm reading Ruthless Vows, which is the second one now, by Rebecca Ross. I think they're YA. Caitlin tells me they're YA.
Caitlin's thumbs up. Caitlin's our fact checker,
It
book
is
lover
about,
here.
it's fiction, and it's about war correspondence in like a fictional world where two superpowers are kind of at war.
Cool.
And there's magic involved and things like that. And then I've also joined the Sarah J. Maas universe.
Yes.
But
Speaking of chokeholds.
But I started with A Court of Thorns and Roses. I started with the second series, and I'm on the third book of that one. So those are kind of the big ones of the summer.
We were just talking about the Sarah J. Maas books, and it's I'm on Book Talk, and it's funny that it was mentioned by our guests about how, you know, people can say, "Oh, I haven't read in a long time," and then all of a sudden they're reading a series, and the series is like hundreds of pages.
Sarah's books there's 18 books between when you start her first Throne of Glass to the end of her series. So if you jump in, you're committing.
You're going 2 feet. What makes reading in the summer, you know, different than reading at other times of year for you?
For me, it's that I'm not tethered to book club. So I can read as much as I want, whatever I want. I don't have to read for a deadline. So I'm more free and more fluffy with my reads. I read a lot more beach books because I think there's something about summer that encourages you to just slow down a little bit. You're not turning on the TV as much, unless you're watching the news.
Yes. Plug alert.
But you're going to like sit by the pool, or you're going to share books with your friends, or maybe you're just sitting out in a lounger while your kids are playing in the backyard, right? Assuming that your kids play and don't glue themselves to their tablet. But there's just something about the slowing down. And I mean, I carry my Kobo everywhere. So I often, like, if I'm waiting at a doctor's office, I'll pull out the Kobo. Or if I'm waiting in line for an oil change, I pull out the Kobo. So I always kind of have a book with me too.
Yeah, I found, you know, audiobooks great for that. And I've even got a book out of the library or bought a book and got the audiobook as well.
I do that too.
It's a double up. It's wild.
Especially if it's a book you're really enjoying, because
Yes.
you're like, I can listen in the car, and then when I get home, I can read, which makes me sound a little insane.
No,
but when the book is good, the book is good.
This is all about book lovers, so we're not shaming anyone today. How do you find out about new books, Sam?
Well,
I mean, you talk about the book club, so you maybe get, you know, publicity or people sending things out, but just in general, you're not in a community where people are probably messaging you or recommending things to you.
this is like the time of my life I'm having with books right now. When I was younger, before I went into journalism, if I wasn't a journalist, I was like, I'm going to work in the publishing industry. I'm going to edit books.
There's still time.
There is still time, but you don't really do that in Regina. You're going to typically move to Toronto, to New York, to Vancouver, and you're going to work for a big publishing house. You can work for some of the smaller ones, but it's typically not a full-time job. So, I mean, I even wrote a book when I was in the 4th grade, and I think it was called Loving Lies, and it will never actually see the light of day. Oh my
gosh, we need that.
It's so bad.
If Sam's parents are listening, please get us a copy of that.
But
I'll fast track that to print.
finding out about new, so now I have this great relationship with some of the biggest publishers in Canada, and they just mail me books.
Amazing.
Which, if you would have told me 15 years ago that new releases would just show up at work for me, I would not have believed you.
Sam has shared a lot of those books with me as well.
It's amazing. But also TikTok and Instagram, I am on Book Talk. And so if I see something show up over and over again, I'm like,
You're gonna give it a shot.
There's a reason for this. But also we have a newsroom full of bookworms. So if someone's like, oh, I read this, or hey, do you have that? We share.
There's a good trading system here. I know I'll shut up a few of our friends here, Caitlin, Jenna, Dan Plaster, a lot of people that share books. What are books this was speaking of unfair questions, I asked this to Miranda and our last guest about TBR. What's on your TBR? What's on your to be read? I know you have a stack, Sam, but what's something that you're itching to get into that you just haven't dove into yet?
When you talk about the stack, Daniel, my fiance, got me a Kobo for my birthday so I would stop buying books because they were overtaking our living space, and now the publishers just mail them to me. So there's that. Okay, on my must-read list right now, because I haven't read it yet, which is, I feel ashamed to admit, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like everyone has read this book except for me. It's about like Hollywood in the 80s. I do. I have the physical copy.
I have it too. I can own it too.
I have the physical copy. Owning books and reading books are also two different hobbies.
Yes, that's true.
This one you suggested to me, and also my friend's sister suggested to me, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Yes.
By Gabrielle Zevin. if you want to tell people what that one's about.
It's a hot book. It's a friendship book, and it's
in the vein of Ready Player One.
And it's sort of it's video game developers. It's a lifelong friendship story between a male and a female, and there's some twists in there. I know there's twists that you won't see coming, and that's what makes a good book. And it's written in sort of like I'm 42, so I feel like the authors are around the same age. So a lot of the references they're making, pop culture references, video game references, people of this generation would get, millennials would get. So I thought that was worth the hype. It's definitely a hyped like bestseller booktops book, but it's good.
And then the last one, which when I was making notes for this, realized it came out July 30th and was like, oh, how do I get my hands on this? The Grandest Game #1 by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Have you read the Inheritance Games series yet?
I haven't. I know I'm familiar, but I haven't read it.
So it's a YA series, but do not let that stop you. It is about a girl who randomly inherits. This man dies. She has no familial connection to him. She inherits all of his money, and she has to go through all of these steps with his grandsons to get her inheritance. And it's like National Treasure level, like there's magic and there's puzzles and there's
Nick
all
Cage
these
is in
things. No Nicolas Cage. But it's so great. Like it's something you really could read with your kids or something you could just enjoy. I think it should be a movie. But there's 4 books out already. This is the 5th, and it's what's happened after everything else.
Okay.
And she's opened up this game to other people to kind of make use of her money. So it's called The Grandest Game, and it just came out. So I will be...
What a humble brag. Came out July 30th. How to get my hands on this? I don't even know.
I will buy it. I just,
It's completely fair. If you want to join our conversation that Sam and I are having, please phone in.
Or please do.
1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Tell us give us some recommendations. Sam and I are dying for some new recommendations. While we're chatting here, I've assembled a list. I've kept track of the books I've read this year.
Okay.
And I have a couple other ones I want to recommend to people.
Are these in your dad book club too?
I'm in a dad book club, and some of these are, yes, definitely. One I recently read that was in our book club was Medicine Walk by Richard Wagamese, who's
all of his books are good.
It's unbelievable. It's really good. It's a Canadian author. He passed away a couple of years ago, but all of his books are really good. They're not long, and it's just a bit heartbreaking, but a great read. Another one that I really liked, which is also in sort of like if you're ready to cry, in your feelings.
Here's Adam's emotional book list.
It's called Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, and she's the lead singer of the indie band Japanese Breakfast. And the story, it's a true story about her as a Korean American growing up in the States and her mother passing away of cancer, and just the journey of being going through that difficult time, but also growing up in her circumstances and being a minority in a mostly white area, and a bit about her coming up as a sort of a rock star, but it's a really good accessible but also heartbreaking read, I would say. We talked about the book club a bit. What can you tell us and our listeners about book club?
Okay. So it's called the Novel Idea Society, and we exist mostly on Facebook. You can find it by going to facebook.com/the Novel Idea Society. I learned how to personalize a web address. And would you believe there is almost 700 people in this book club now? Like it has really, really grown. And it's not just in Regina, which is where this book club started. It's across the province. There's people across Canada. We've got people in the States. It runs from September to June on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. We do hold it at the George Bothwell branch of the Regina Public Library, which is in the Southland Mall here in Regina. But it's a hybrid option. So we bring in the author of every single book, and I do a little interview with the author about the process, about the characters, about everything else. And then I open it up to the audience and they can have a chance to talk to these authors. We've had some really, really cool guests. Wa Bryce came in to talk about Moon of the Crusted Snow, Moon of the Turning Leaves. One of my favorite books of the last few years was Lessons in Life from Death. And it was Dr. Jean Memorio, and she was one of the doctors that ushered in MAID in Canada. And she talked about what the process was like to perform a death, as she calls it, and to understand what doctors are facing in those moments. I think we face so much on patient care and everything else, but to understand what the doctors have to go through mentally to get to that place and to help people make those choices, it was really eye-opening for me. We have a lot of female authors. I think I come by that probably honestly. We've had a lot of great Canadian authors, and this has been going since this will be year 10.
Amazing.
So it's crazy. And every year by June, I'm like, oh, I'm so tired of doing this every month. And by September, I'm like ramped up and
You're
ready to go.
Yes.
And we're getting into that. We're getting into that point again where we're in August, and I'm
closer.
starting to pick books for the next season.
Sam, we want to get to one of our callers. Daniel's on the line. He's an author, Future Foxes of New Earth. And Daniel, hello, and thanks for joining Blue Sky.
Well, thanks for having me.
Daniel, we're talking about reading and books. What is your, reading, I guess, journey in the summertime? Do you read more? Are you a all-season reader? What can you tell us?
I am a fanatical reader. And it's, you name it, as long as it's in the science fiction, fantasy, adventure genre, I'll probably read it.
And I mentioned you're an author. Can you tell us about your book?
The book is titled Future Foxes of New Earth and subtitled Beginnings. And it's basically a world of anthropomorphic animals. And it's a young adult read, but just about anybody can read it. It covers all ages, I think.
And Daniel, do you have any recommendations for our listeners out here?
Oh, just about anything from Mercedes Lackey. I've always enjoyed her writings.
Daniel, thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you.
That was Daniel from Saskatoon, and as you mentioned, he wrote a book, Future Foxes of New Earth, subtitled Beginnings, and he wanted to recommend that to us today. Thanks so much. And Sam, we're talking about, recommendations. Mm-hmm. How often do you seek, a friend? Do you have someone you could go to and say, you read this, I trust your opinion?
That happens a lot. I use Goodreads for that a lot because you can see what your friends and family are reading up to the moment. You can update the percentage of the book that you're finished. And so it's sometimes in Goodreads, just through the app, I'll see, a lot of people are reading this book. Or you can follow authors that you like and you can see, they've got a new book coming out. I'm interested in that. So I often use that. Through book club, I find people come to me more than I get to go to other people.
They're looking for your recommendations.
Yeah, mostly just because I'm constantly surrounded by books, which there was a time that I was like, this is embarrassing. And now I'm like, you know what?
Embrace it.
I'm 40. I do what I want.
We're clipping that.
I'm 40. I do what I want.
Clip that for TikTok. We have another caller on the line. Jack is joined us. Jack, good afternoon. Thanks for listening to Blue Sky. Thanks for calling in.
Yes.
Jack,
happy to.
You want to talk about beach books? What are your recommendations, or what makes you go to a beach book?
Well, as I mentioned to your screener, we just finished the Manitou Beach Literary Festival on the weekend, and so those are the beach books I want to talk about, and I want to talk about nonfiction, which often there isn't as much an awareness, but in the summertime, I love reading nonfiction. It's so informative, and we had some fantastic Saskatchewan authors at our event. We had Ryan Miley, his new book, and Eric Klein's new book, Squandered, Dale Eisler's new book, From Left to Right. And Jane Philpott, actually, from a former federal minister of health. So there were some really informative books and good panel discussions around. But I really like the nonfiction for my summer reading. It wasn't always that way. And then the other sort of go-to is I'm involved with the Saskatchewan Book Awards. And boy, when that short list comes out, if you want to generate an instant quality reading list of Saskatchewan authors, that's always a fantastic find.
Jack, what makes you gravitate to nonfiction in the summertime? It's sort of the opposite of what we hear a lot of times with people wanting to kind of unplug and turn off and have an escape. What makes you gravitate to nonfiction?
I think I'm more relaxed and more in a learning mode, if you will.
Okay.
So I like to follow the info and the revelation of fact. I do a lot of fantasy reading and some really good. We also had Rita Bouvier and Peace Akintate. So poetry is always wonderful to read, and I find poetry is a 30 below in the kitchen read with a cup of coffee.
When you say you gravitate towards nonfiction, like nonfiction is a huge chunk of the bookstore. It could mean just about anything. What do you gravitate to in nonfiction?
Well, I'm a bit of a cultural political junkie, so I tend to go to well, first of all, I'm really supportive of Canadian and in particular Saskatchewan nonfiction, and I tend to go to politics, something that touches on the political, and that's the draw for me.
Adam would know something about that.
For example, Ryan Miley's book is an amazing analysis of many perspectives of his experience through the whole pandemic as a doctor in emergency in many situations. So that I found really interesting. And as a political junkie, following, from the province of Tommy Douglas to now the province of Brad Wall, Scott Moe, Dale Eisler just maps out that the whole transition of how that happened, and that it wasn't a made in Saskatchewan process totally. There were so many changes in the world that affected Saskatchewan, and that was part of the what I would call the drift to the right. So yeah, those things really I find intriguing, and I try to be as informed as I can about that stuff.
Jack, I'd love to hear it. Thanks so much for calling in today.
Okay, great show. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And we're talking fiction, nonfiction all over. I'm Sam McKaig is our guest right now.
He talked about poetry. Can I talk about poetry for a second?
You have your mic is on.
So poetry is not typically something I go towards. It's not typically my jam, if you will. But through TikTok, I came across this girl named Josie Balka, woman. She's a radio host in Calgary. She works for a country music station, but she has the voice of an angel. And she started recording her poetry on TikTok. And you've probably seen it shown and don't even realize it's come across your Instagram and TikTok pages. This has made her so famous, she has a book deal. So now her name's Josie Balka, and she has a book called I Hope You Remember that's going to come out in 2025 with Simon & Schuster. So it goes to show you how much of an influence that book talk and TikTok and Instagram are really having on particularly younger audiences and what they're, I was going to say cannibalizing, but that's not the right word, what they're taking in.
Yes. And I think, I know what you're saying. I think too, when you walk into a bookstore, you'll see a section now that's labeled for, the trendy books, but those books are they're popping on TikTok, Instagram,
There's
on social media.
There's also a spicy section in chapters I noticed the other day, which I sent to my fiance, and I just got back an eye roll.
I'm unfamiliar. We're talking about your book club. What are some books that we have coming up on the list?
Okay. September, we are reading The Traitor's Daughter, Captured by Nazis, Pursued by the KGB, My Mother's Odyssey to Freedom from Her Secret Past. It's by Roxana Spicer. It comes out August 27th. Roxana grew up in Saskatchewan, in Netherhill, population at the time, 80. It's just east of Kindersley. She was a documentary filmmaker. She's a former CBC investigative journalist, and she lives in Toronto. So the backstory, let me just read you the back of the book and see if you're into it. As a child, Roxana Spicer would sometimes wake up to the sound of the Red Army Choir. She'd tiptoe downstairs to find her mom, cigarette in one hand and Black Russian in the other, singing along. Roxana would keep her company and wonder. Everyone in their village knew Agnes Spicer was Russian, that she'd been captive of the Nazis, and that they all knew because she kept her secrets close. they all wanted to know how she managed to escape Germany, what the tattoo on her arm meant, even her real name. Discovering the truth about her beloved, charismatic, volatile mother became Roxana's obsession. Throughout her career as a journalist and documentarian, between investigations across Canada and around the world, she always went home to ask her mom more questions, often while filming. Roxana also took every chance to visit a few places that she knew played a role in her mom's story, including places in Russia and Germany, home to POWs, slave laborers during the war, notorious concentration camps. Under Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and the early years of Putin, she was able to find people, places, and documents that are now, perhaps forever, lost again.
Wow.
Yeah, sounds like, and she's from here, so she's going to join us by Zoom from Toronto, and we will have a conversation about the story, and then people will be able to talk to her about it. So that's September. And then in October, I always pick something spooky for October. It's called We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kleiber. It's already out. He's a writer and a stop-motion animator, and his debut novel, We Used to Live Here, started as a serialized short story on Reddit, where it won Scariest Story of 2021 on the No Sleep Forum, which has 18 million members. I don't know Reddit, apparently, as well as other people. So film rights have been snapped up by Netflix. And he lives in Vancouver. So here's the background on that one. As a young queer couple flips houses, Charlie and Eve can't believe the killer deal they've gotten on an old house in a picturesque neighborhood. As they're walking in the house one day, there's a knock on the door. A man stands there with his family, claiming to have lived there years before, asking if it's all right if he shows his kids around. People pleaser to a fault, Eve lets them in. As soon as the strangers enter their home, uncanny and inexplicable things start happening, including the family's youngest child going missing and a ghostly presence materializing in the basement. Even more weird, the family can't seem to take the hint that their visit should be over, and when Charlie suddenly vanishes, Eve slowly loses her grip on reality. Something is terribly wrong with the house and with the visiting family, or is Eve just imagining things?
Wow.
So that's October.
What a hook. And those are you have me hooked on both of those. We had a question about if people aren't in the city and want to be part of the book club, is that possible?
Absolutely. You can go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/The Novel Idea Society, or find me on Facebook and send me a message. I'll hook you up. There is a link that the library will send you out. You join the Zoom call, and you can be part of it just like the rest of us.
Amazing. And I wanted to mention one of our colleagues here, who's one of the hardest working people in show business, Jenna Leith, has sent us some of her recommendations.
Oh, she's got good ones.
And she says summer read here, and I'm going to call her out because this first one is definitely not a summer read in the traditional sense. Nuclear War by Annie Jacobson.
Oh, she likes things a little more dark and twisty.
This is dark, and this is what would happen if there actually was a nuclear war. And it's nonfiction, and it says by the minute what would happen. So if you're into that and you want a summer beach read, light and airy.
Hey, nonfiction. We just heard it's a thing.
This is not romantasy. So that's one of her recommendations. She says Radium Girls by Kate Moore, College Girl Missing by Sean Cohen, The Billionaire Murders, Kevin Donovan, and she also said another Taylor Jenkins read, Malibu Rising is her favorite.
I've heard that one is really good. I haven't read that one yet either, but it's on the list.
So, Sam, before we leave everyone here, what is something that they should read before the summer's over?
Go pick up something by Emily Henry. It's light, it's fluffy, it's a good story. She's literally got a book called Beach Reads, if that so inclines you. Or something by Carly Fortune. She's Canadian and she has a new one out as well. Same kind of beach, fluffy, happy, leave you feeling good as we head into September. And I will say very quickly that one of my favorite books in the book that I always recommend to people, and if you're talking about tennis and you're now into tennis, obsessed.
Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open, is one of my favorite books of all time. It's unbelievable. Go read that book. It's great. Thanks to Sam McKay. Thanks to Caitlin Schroep. Thanks to Chris Haynes. I'm Adam Hunter. Thanks for joining us, Blue Sky. We'll do it again tomorrow.